And good morning. Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker is my very special guest today, Friday, April 3rd, 2020. I'm Ben Dryden, and you're watching DrydenWire Live. I do want to say a quick thank you to all of my guests this week: mental health professional Darren Cox, Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald, Sawyer County Judge John Yackel, and Spooner Superintendent Dr. David Aslan. Reminder, you can watch all of our live chats at 8:30 a.m. on our Facebook page, or if you've missed it, a recording of all of our live chats are on our website at DrydenWire.com. So let's see if we can bring in our guest today. There he is. Governor Walker, how are you? Thanks so much for being here.
I'm great. Sorry if I'm looking a little worn out. I did an hour's worth of workout this morning, so I got this challenge every day, 30 days of doing 30 days of prayer and 30 days of workout. So I'm doing my part to keep that commitment, and I challenge people to do the same.
That's a great idea. Is there like a step-by-step or a list or something you follow, or is it just do whatever you want, just make sure 30 days?
30 days. If people go, scottwalker.com's got all my stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I put a post up every day of a different scripture that I like. Obviously, the last few weeks have been a lot of scriptures focused on people's fear and worry and what God says about that in the Bible, both in the Old and the New Testament. And so if people don't have their own devotionals, I tell them, go to that, read that scripture, and have that be the start of your prayer each day.
I follow you on Twitter, and I saw that one of those this morning as well. And first of all, thank you for at least bringing some kind of a kindness to Twitter. Because Twitter is, man, that's a crazy place. I mean, there's so much hate.
It is. My wife says she hates going on it because everybody's so nasty. And my sons, I've got two sons, Matt and Alex, 25, 24, and my 25-year-old has a digital marketing firm. And he's like, Dad, well, if you want more followers, and I've got a fair number of followers, but he goes, if you want more, you got to be more aggressive. And I said, well, that's not me. Right. You know, I'll point out the contrary. Certainly, I'm not afraid to do that, but I don't need to take cheap shots. And unfortunately, that's a lot of what Twitter is. Certainly on the left, but sometimes even on the right.
I know.
Although here's an interesting reminder for folks who get consumed with what's trending. And they just did this study about a month ago. They do it every year. Pew Research does, and they showed that out of all the adults in America, only 22% are on Twitter. And get this, of that 22%, 80% of the tweets are done by 10% of the people. So when somebody says something's trending on Twitter, it's really only about 2-3% of the entire population.
That's interesting.
So I tell people, take a chill. Just because something's trending doesn't mean every American thinks that. It just means a bunch of people in their mother's basement are worked up about something.
That's awesome. Well, I was going to ask you.
And I apologize if you're watching in your mother's basement. I like you too.
When I first knew that you were going to be coming on, or thought you were going to be, but I didn't want to jinx it, so I was just waiting. I didn't really see anything that you were doing or have any info, so I figured, I'll start off with, now that you're not the governor, I don't know, you're supposed to be waking up at 10, checking DrydenWire.com for your latest news, shameless plug, taking early naps, binge watching Netflix, but yesterday I was sent your bio. And holy cow, you seem busier now than ever. And here's just some of these. You're currently Young America's Foundation's president-elect, a role you will take on full-time in early 2021. Yep. You serve as the chairman of the board of trustees for the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars within the Smithsonian Institute. You're a senior advisor.
That's a mouthful right there. Right?
Yeah, no kidding. You're a senior advisor to the National Taxpayers Union. You serve on the board of Students for Life Action. You're the chairman of the Institute for Reforming Government. You're the finance chairman for the National Republican Redistricting Trust, a speaker with Worldwide Speakers Group, and our nationally honorary chairman of the Center for State-Led National Debt Solutions, which is leading the campaign for a balanced budget amendment. I mean, good night. Looking at this list, is this a situation where your wife just said, honey, you can't stay at home. You got to get a job. And then you just went crazy.
Well, it wasn't even the job. She said, you just got to get out of the house. The first couple of weeks, she said, I will kill you if you're here any longer than this.
That's what I got out of that list. That's what I did.
Well, and it's fun. Actually, I bump into people in airports now all the time, both here in Wisconsin and around the country, because I travel more now, up until this month, obviously, but I traveled more than I ever had as governor. As governor, I was out on the road every day. Usually Wednesday I was in the Capitol, and all the other days I was traveling, but I was around the state. Now I'm flying, to New York and California and Texas and Florida and everywhere else out there. So it's a lot of fun because I get to engage not just on business, and I do a few boards on business as well. But it's really, I didn't want to leave the movement. I saw what we did in Wisconsin was so remarkable, and it gives us so much credibility to push people not only in our nation's capital but in our state houses across the country, and they love it. They always say, "How does a state that was once as blue as Wisconsin get all these major conservative reforms done?" And I said, "Well, it's not about me. It was about a whole team. It was about the state Senate, the state Assembly, our cabinet, and most importantly, a ton of grassroots activists who not only helped us get elected and elected and elected and elected, but who ultimately held our feet to the fire and helped us, even between elections, get things done." So I'm having a ton of fun. It's a little bit weird now because I haven't been traveling. I got the self-quarantine before most Americans. I spoke at CPAC, and I, like Ted Cruz and others, I was one of those guys who bumped into someone who tested positive. So I've been quarantined. I've been self-quarantined for about a month now, the first 2 weeks of my home alone. And then since then, just like everybody else, kind of stuck without much movement.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the coronavirus, but looking at this and your views on that and the elections and a whole bunch of things, but looking at this list, I see a lot of the things regarding Young Americans Foundation. What is that, and how did you get involved with that?
Well, I've been involved for years. YAF, Young Americans Foundation. In fact, if people want to know about it, it's yaf.org, yaf.org. And Ronald Reagan was a part of it. William F. Buckley actually started in the 60s. Ronald Reagan, long before he was president, was the national chair. And really what it's about is teaching young people, college students, and now even high school students about individual freedom, free enterprise, strong national defense, traditional conservative values, all the things that Ronald Reagan stood for and talked about throughout his time as governor, then out in the circuit nationally, and then as president. And one of the cool things is this organization has more than 500 chapters on college campuses around the country. They do national programs and conferences for both college and high school students. Probably the thing most familiar to many people, even if they're not on campus, is they sponsor the largest conservative lecture series. So if you know Ben Shapiro, a pretty common name, particularly amongst young people, YAF is the sole sponsor of Ben Shapiro on college campuses and has been for years. And then one thing I particularly love, looking ahead to be the president, is about 2 decades ago, when the Reagan family was looking to sell the ranch out in Santa Barbara, the ranch many of us remember during his time as president was deemed the Western White House. YAF stepped up and purchased that ranch, and now they have an education center out in Santa Barbara where they have every month students come in high school, students come in from college. They do training. They have great conservative speakers, and then they take them up in the mountains to the ranch. And I've been there a gazillion times, and I love it every time because it embodies both the freedom and the frugality of our 40th president, Ronald Reagan.
How long has that been around?
It's been around since the early 1960s, so it's steeped in tradition. The gentleman, Ron Robinson, who's the current president, who will be retiring next year, has been around literally for decades. He was a part of the Reagan Revolution. And they came to me this past year and said, "Hey, would you even be interested in this?" And I came back to them and I said, we love YAF. I've spoke for years. I've been a speaker myself. I've been at the ranch. My wife, Tonette's on the board of directors for or board of governors for the ranch itself. We love the organization. People like Sean and Rachel Duffy are real involved with it. Other national speakers, not just Ben Shapiro, but Art Laffer. I mean, you go down the list, all these great conservative icons.
Wow.
But I said, if you just want more of the same, I'm not your guy. But I said, when I look at the numbers and I see 58% of the adults under 30 think socialism is somehow acceptable, and even worse, when I see less than a quarter of all that same age group are exceptionally proud to be Americans, I said, we got to do something about this. Now, I'm an optimist. Some people look at those numbers and get, frustrated, upset, wigged out, you name it. I look at it and say, with all the advantages the left has, in Hollywood, in media, in K through 12 education in many places, certainly with left-wing professors on college campuses, with the influence of Barack Obama when they were growing up, and now people like AOC and others tweeting at them, with all these biases, I'm amazed it's not 100%. that believe in socialism. So to me, if 42% of young Americans still get that socialism's bad, we've got a fighting chance if we just level the playing field.
I didn't know. So it was what was it? Yap.org?
Yaf.org.
YAF.org. All right.
And like I said, the best part about it's the ranch, but they do many other wonderful things.
I want to talk to you about the coronavirus.
Yeah.
What effects so far have you seen from personally, or that you've heard from others that are having effects on businesses and people in their daily lives?
Well, first off, part of the reason why I was in that self-quarantine is a friend of mine, someone I've gone to Israel with, someone I worked with at CPAC was one of the people who tested positive. So literally a month plus ago, I bumped into him in February. I spent 2 weeks, and in that 2 weeks, I did a lot of work at home, all the things people are doing now, a lot of video conferences, writing and that. But I also, as you can imagine, spent a lot of time reading about this because I thought, heck, if I've been exposed, I'm going to get it. I want to know as much as I can about this. And it's been interesting. In a way, what I thought was a curse is a bit of a blessing because I had 2 weeks head start on most people in the sense that, I wasn't exposed. I would otherwise have been traveling. I've since then have another friend who also tested positive, who's out in Montana. The good news is both of them who were hospitalized, the one had double pneumonia and was in the ICU. Both of them are at home. Both of them are recovering. Both of them are going to be fine. Obviously, there are plenty of other examples in the extreme of not only elderly people, but people with compromised immune systems and other things who are not. So this is far more serious, I think, than many of us, a month and a half ago. I heard about it, but I thought, okay, that's, it's over in China.
Yep.
We're not going to have the impact. And every day you start watching these numbers. And I really, early on, when I was in self-quarantine, was one of the people saying, hey, this is not just the flu. I get it. We can't overreact. But I also think we got to be careful that we don't dismiss this into thinking that this is just going to be like the flu. Because as we've seen, it's fundamentally different. Yeah. But I do think one of the missing ingredients in all this, particularly as I talk to small business owners and others, is if our leaders, not just in Washington, but if the governor, if mayors, local officials, and others, one of the things that frustrated me, having been in that position for 8 years, never like the coronavirus, but with floods and tornadoes and other disasters, is you got to get out early and explain to people what's going on. And I think there's largely been a void of what's going on, what's happening. Don't exaggerate, don't embellish, just give people the facts, but then tell them not just what they need to do, but more importantly, why they need to do it.
Sure. So
and I think that's been missing.
So is that one of those things that if you were still governor, not necessarily to critique, I don't want this to be Walker or Evers kind of a thing, but just you've had that position before. You've dealt with similar things, certainly not this. Is that something that you would have done differently?
Absolutely. And to tell you it's not partisan, I actually do not agree with Governor Cuomo on hardly anything politically. But I think, considering the circumstances in New York State, I think he's done a reasonably good job. He's on TV all the time. He explains calmly what's going on. He hasn't gotten particularly partisan with the president. In fact, I give him a hat tip on that. I think he realizes that when you're in a crisis, nobody wants to hear bickering.
Right.
They just want to hear, what are you going to do? How are we going to do it? How are we going to work together? But I think the big missing thing here has been, and I hope it will get better, early on, long before they started shutting things down, if we had just said, hey, we're heading towards this point where we're going to have to consider shutting things down. In fact, actually, the opposite said, oh, no, we're not going to do that. No, I would have said, hey, I don't want to shut things down. I think this would be really bad for the economy. But if we don't get serious about this, this is where we're headed. Yeah. I think in particular, forget about the curve and the charts. The simple way to explain it is we got X amount of hospital beds, particularly ICU units. If we get past this point, we're not going to have space for people, and that's when we really get trouble out there. People knew that and said, okay, here are the things you need to do if you have a business open to make sure we don't get to that point. I think in the Midwest, we get it. We're empathetic. We want to do the right thing. Yeah. We don't necessarily need the government to tell us to do it if we understand why.
Yeah. Speaking of that, obviously, Wisconsin made up a lot of businesses, but up here in the north of Wisconsin, it's significantly small businesses, a significant amount of small businesses. A lot of these businesses aren't going to survive this safer at home. And again, It is what it is. It's not saying that it was right or it was wrong. It's irrelevant. But a lot of these businesses aren't going to survive this.
Right.
What would you tell those business owners?
Well, a couple of things. First off, I now own 3 small businesses, so I can empathize,
there you go.
not just with this situation, but with all the crazy. I felt there was too much paperwork in government before. Now owning 3 new businesses, my own, I'm like, you want to pull my hair out half the time with all the local, state, and federal stuff. So I'd be an even fiercer advocate for getting government out of the way, except when vitally, vitally important for the health and safety of folks.
Sure.
But I would say not only to small business owners, but to anyone tuning in here today, is no matter what you think, no matter what you believe, whether it should be closed or not closed, the fact is we are, and the only way to save these small businesses to begin with is we all got to do our part to not let it spread anymore, because the longer people get exposed, the more that this carries on, the worse off it's going to be. So first off, do your part in the sense that if you don't have to be out, wash your hands, clean everything. Don't go out, don't interact with folks unless you absolutely have to be at a grocery store or something else, because the longer this lingers, the worse off it's going to be for our small businesses, our taverns, our restaurants, all those sorts of places. Secondly, I think we've got to have a plan, and I appreciate what the president and others are doing when it comes to the health and safety and all these sorts of things. And we got to do that. Obviously, we got to get healthy so we can get back to work again. But I wrote a piece in the Washington Times that in the print edition today, it's online. You can, again, see it. Go to scottwalker.com. You'll see the link to my social. It's posted there. But I talk about, in addition to making sure we protect the health and safety of every American, we got to walk and chew gum at the same time. We got to have a plan to get America back to work. And so I think this is, we can't just stop on April 30th. Hopefully we're past that point and say May 1st, great, we're back to work.
Right.
We got to have a game plan for how we move. And I call it with extreme caution, but we got to start moving back to getting back to work again. And then the last thing I just say, particularly to small businesses, I'm not a big spender. I don't like spending money. I think the federal debt's already too big, but I get it in situations like this where it was not your fault. It arguably wasn't anybody's fault. It was an act of God. But like a tornado or a flood, if it shuts down a given community and those businesses are affected, the government, or the taking of property is probably a better example. If there's eminent domain, the government legally is obligated to give people compensation. Yeah. I think there has to be some compensation, not just to workers, but particularly to the small businesses.
Is this one of those times where you look at what the governor's doing, or this crisis, and obviously how it's impacting Wisconsin specifically, and go, I really wish I was still the governor, because here's what I would do? Or is it, man, I'm so glad I'm not the governor and I have to deal with this?
Honestly, it's a little both. I was checking in with family and friends, and some of the people I've called the last few weeks were all the people who were in my cabinet when I was governor, particularly one of the women who was the secretary of the Department of Health Services had actually worked with me years before in county government as well. And we talked about exactly that. On one hand, we were glad that day in and day out we weren't stressed with all the overwhelming sense of responsibility. On the other hand, part of why we liked doing it, and hopefully we're pretty good at it, was because we felt that sense of call to duty. And so, you miss that a little bit. That's why I've tried to help in other ways, get objective information out, be responsible, and advocate for personal liberties and freedom and small businesses. But also, as I just mentioned, be clear about saying, hey, having said all that, the best way we can help out is by following these guidelines and try to be kind of that reasonable path forward. And it's why you mentioned even in the introduction, it's why I haven't just gone out and just made money. Not that there's anything wrong with making money, but long before this, I want to be engaged. I want to be involved. I want to help the conservative movement, and I want to help our state and our nation move forward.
How do you think President Trump has done in the handling of this?
I think he's been really solid. Obviously, like anybody, there was some hiccups along the way, but people forget more than 2 months ago, he appointed Mike Pence, the vice president, to be the head of this White House task force on coronavirus. Way back at the first week of February, even in his State of the Union address, while the Democrats were talking about impeachment, he was already in his State of the Union address talking about the coronavirus. Early on, he shut down travel from China. What did Joe Biden say? He said he was racist and xenophobic and all these things. He shut down travel with Europe. Yeah, there might have been a few phrases here or there that were hiccups along the way. But I think you look at the things that you want people to do in this circumstance, he's done them. And I get the balance he's had. Some people might grumble, why do you keep extending this? I think his instinct is he wants to get back to work. He wants the economy going, but he's also listening to some of the key folks, the medical folks, the healthcare professionals who are saying, hey, this is only going to get worse unless we take this on. And I think he's had a good balance. The one thing I just would add, I loved it the other day when Mike Lindell from My Pillow and Deborah Waller from Jockey and other businesses were there, because we can't do this just with government. We can't do this even with cooperation between federal, state, and local government. The private sector's got to be a key part of that. And I can't imagine a President Joe Biden bringing businesses like that to the White House to say thanks for what you're doing. This President Trump understands, and Vice President Pence understand, that businesses and nonprofits and religious organizations are going to have to be at the forefront of recovery.
Well, speaking of that and President Trump and the elections, what impact is this going to have on the elections, the coronavirus, in 2020, even starting just with this coming up Tuesday? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I still hope, and again, reminder today, if you're listening, anybody in Wisconsin, you might have some few folks that watch over in Minnesota as well, but particularly here in Wisconsin, you have until 5 o'clock today to go to myvote.wi.gov. That's myvote, all one, no space, myvote.wi.gov. You can still get an absentee ballot mailed to your home as of 5 o'clock today. Fill it out, mail it back right away. This is going to be so critically important because the election is still being held on Tuesday. Your ballot will count as long as you mail it before then. It may delay the results a day or two before we know statewide, but it's so important because for a lot of folks who are scared about going outside, who don't want to be standing in line at their polling place, do that. You got till 5 o'clock today. True. And don't just do it. Contact every other conservative you can think of. Everybody, my family's done it. My wife, my kids, my mother, my brother, my sister-in-law, all these folks, you got to encourage people to do that because there's two big statewide races. One is the Supreme Court, which is so critically important. Eric Holder's here. He's involved not because he cares about Wisconsin. He's involved because he wants to get that Supreme Court back so he can fool around with redistricting to keep people like Nancy Pelosi and others in the House majority. Liberals want to gear up for this for the fall. We got to get Dan Kelly reelected on April 7th. And a lot of people don't know this, but not only do the Democrats have a primary, Donald Trump is on the ballot for the primary. And there'd be nothing better than doing what he's done in other states and having over-the-top numbers for him as a great sign as to how we could do better and win for him in November.
Do you think, I'm going to pick your political inside brain here, campaigns you've run for offices and you look at numbers and all that, Republican or Democrat, having this absentee ballot vote, which one do you think is benefiting more, Republicans or Democrats?
Well, historically, the what they were trying to do, because remember, they've done a number of things trying to rig this. You had the Dane County, where Madison's at, and the Milwaukee County clerks claim, which was illegal, claim that you could sign up to vote on that myvote.wi.gov and get an absentee ballot without showing a photo ID. Right. That's wrong. That's not legal. Yeah. And it's not hard. I mean, you take your ID and you hold it up to your camera or your computer and you take a picture, boom, it's done. But I even did it, help my mom with it. But it's one of those where they're trying to, I think, rig the election by doing that. The other thing they tried to do here and across the nation is argue that just every voter should automatically get a ballot mailed to them. Well, that's bogus because there's a lot of people registered who don't live at that place anymore. True. We went to court over that as well because those voter files should be cleared up. But I would stress on the flip side is because so many people are going to be intimidated because of coronavirus to go out in public, Republicans who typically, and I don't read my, honest to God, one of the sanity things I've done, the sanest things I should say I've done to keep my sanity is for 8-9 years, I post things and I don't ever read my comments because 9-10 years ago they were so nasty. I just said,
It's funny because I just started doing that actually just this last week. I post it and I don't even look anymore.
Oh no, you did that part.
I just don't even look.
I tell candidates, don't even look because it's ridiculous. Yeah. But I was curious just because I wanted to know what the response was when I did this call for the absentee ballot. Mm. And not surprisingly, a number of conservatives said, "Oh, I don't trust this. This isn't going." And I said, the system is clearly set up, And you got to encourage people to do this because the left already has. Even a couple of weeks ago, Dane County and Milwaukee County and Kenosha County as well already had more than 50%. The number of people that turned in absentee ballots was already equivalent to more than 50% of what their vote was in the same spring election last year, whereas a number of Republican-leading counties were like 35%. If we don't get those numbers up, we're not going to win with Justice Kelly. We're not going to win these other races.
Sure.
So I get people's resistance. I like to vote in person, but I just tell people you got to do it now. You got till 5 o'clock tonight.
5 o'clock today.
And these races are so important.
Yeah. So on that note, the justice, Supreme Court justice, you had mentioned Dan Kelly. That's something when I look at these polls, or not polls, the results when they're finished, look by county. Anytime that the Supreme Court election is on the ballot, it doesn't seem to have higher numbers,
Right.
or even equal numbers to local, and that's partly understandable. People want to go out and vote for their local person, whether it's a mayor or an assembly person. Why do you think that people don't take the Supreme Court race seriously, or maybe not seriously, but as passionately as they do their local races?
Well, the personalities aren't as obvious. The campaigns are not as intense. People oftentimes don't hear as much about it. And frankly, I imagine most people viewing today are pretty much political and civic junkies, so they get the ramifications. But for most people, even those who lean conservative, for most voters, you get why your governor's important, you get why your president's important, maybe your member of Congress. But a lot of people say, I don't really know. What does a judge do?
Right.
It's all the same, isn't it? And it should be. Actually, in my view of the world, it shouldn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. If you're doing your job as a judge, you should just uphold the Constitution and all those laws that are duly enacted with it. I always tell people I never ask if someone's a Republican. I don't even care if they're a conservative politically. What I care about is if they're conservative judicially, meaning they only enforce the law. They only uphold the law under the Constitution, no more, no less. If you want to make policy, go run for a legislative branch position, go run for your county board or city council or state legislature, Congress. But what we've sadly seen is too often in the past, liberals have pushed activist judges. That's what Dan Kelly's opponent is. She's from Dane County. Her supporters out there saying, she's going to do social justice and environmental justice. Well, no matter what you think about those issues, whether you're liberal or conservative, even if you're a liberal, you shouldn't want, in a perfect world, you shouldn't want a Supreme Court justice or a circuit court or court of appeals judge to do anything on those issues. They should just uphold the law, and that's what Dan Kelly has done and will do, and why it's so critically important to get out vote for.
Well, I know I'm not going to say the person's name. He's probably listening. A friend of mine, actually, in the last election just a couple months ago, he had voted for his local ones, and I asked, did he vote for the Supreme Court? And he said, yeah, I voted for this Daniel Kelly. I said, you supporter of Daniel Kelly? He goes, no, I just like the name. And I'm like, oh, boy. I mean, okay, at least you voted, but that's probably not good. Maybe just do a little research first. So,
but exactly though, that is a key thing I often hear, not just about Supreme Court, but particularly about circuit court positions. A name, and for years we lived in Wauwatosa, which is Milwaukee County. There were a ton of Irish judges. Why? Because there was a big Irish contingency for years, and it sounded familiar, kind of like Kelly, Fitzgerald, Reardon, names like that. But that's not the reason to vote for somebody.
Yeah.
The reason to vote for them is because they uphold the things that you believe in.
Got it. Tom, Tiffany has been on our show a few times. Senator Tiffany, he's running for the 7th Congressional District. You came out and endorsed him, even in the primary for the Republican thing. So I have a very important question about Tom Tiffany. Do you have a funny or embarrassing story about him that I can nail him with the next time that he comes on?
Well, ask him about his skipper's cap. I love it.
Okay.
Years ago when I was running for governor, one of the events we did is his family's owned a boat that goes around out of the water out by Rhinelander, and they don't just have the boat. At least for me, I don't know if he always does it, but he put on one of those nice captain's caps, and it reminded me of the cap that
Gilligan's Island. Yeah, I was just thinking
exactly.
the same thing.
Exactly.
So I watch a lot of documentaries. Probably because when I was a kid, we had 3 channels. It was PBS and I think PBS. And I hated documentaries as a kid, but now as an adult, I've watched them all the time, and I like watching the ones about presidential histories. And I think Wisconsin has had, I think we're about the same amount of governors in Wisconsin that we've had as presidents. And a lot of these presidents, I've seen that they will leave notes something for the next president, because or for the next governor or president, it's a pretty exclusive club. Did you receive one when you took office, and did you leave one for Governor Evers?
Yes and yes. And you're right about the numbers. You're right on the money. I was the 45th governor. Donald Trump's the 45th president. So almost exactly the same numbers. But yeah, when I came in, and they're usually not, some presidential letters, I presume, are real detailed in both the one I received and the one I gave. It was really more personal. The one Governor Doyle left, I don't think he'd mind me pointing out, was real simple. He had some strong opinions on who should be providing security for the governor, because his predecessor had shifted the tradition. And so he gave me some advice, which I actually found was quite sound advice, and particularly in light of what happened in 2011 with all the death threats and protests and things of that nature. So personally, I appreciate that, even though politically we weren't aligned. And in terms of Governor Evers, I don't mind sharing it, because I think he actually, somebody asked for an open records request on it, so he eventually put the note out. I did. I'm like,
man,
okay.
What are they expecting to find? Like, they suck at Evers. I mean, really?
Exactly.
Come on.
But see, that's the problem with a lot of the media in Madison. That's exactly what they thought was something nasty.
Open records request.
Yeah. So what it was simple. It was a piece of advice I got not from my predecessor, but from another governor years ago when I first came in. And it was simple. I passed it on to him. I said, make sure you take time to stay connected to your friends to the people who were friends of yours before you were governor, because they might be the only ones you have left when you're done.
Wow.
Now, the good news is I can tell you, after 8 years, I met a lot of people on the way, as well as people I knew before, but who are still good friends, who weren't just friends of mine because I was governor. So thankfully, there's more than that. But the point was, in fact, I'll see them all tonight. We have 6 families, 12 parents who we all met when our kids were in junior kindergarten. All of our kids are now in our 20s, and we've done stuff together for years. Tonight, we're all going to do dinner together via Zoom. So 6 different locations will look like, Brady Bunch opening with all the screens up there, or Hollywood Squares. But the advice was, these families were a good example. But we did things with them. We got together around Christmas. We got together around Labor Day and Memorial Day, and we have what we call we were from Wauwatosa. We call it a Wauwatosa Supper Club, where we make a point, particularly in the spring, summer, and fall, to go to a different supper club around the state every month. And so all those things kept us connected, because they were not political friends. I mean, they supported me, but they were small business owners. 2 are teachers. 1 works in physical therapy.
Sure.
1 works in a moving company. They were all people with, weren't political junkies necessarily, but they were people who kept us grounded, because we all shared the friendship and the time together with our kids growing up. That was really important. So I stressed that to Governor Evers.
Well, that's important as well, to have those, I think, just those connections and those relationships. And actually, Representative Romaine Quinn, who was on our show about a month ago, he announced that he wasn't running for the 75th Assembly District, which kind of caught a lot of people by surprise. When I'd asked him about the what he wasn't going to miss, we ended up having a conversation about the how people view politicians. They've somehow dehumanized them. How have you dealt with when you were governor, or maybe before that, and how do you still deal with it now with the hate? I mean, anger, it's an emotion, I get it, but you cross the line, you get to the hate.
Yeah.
How did you cope with that, and how do you continue to do that?
Well, a couple different things. I joke about this for months. Every time there was a Democrat primary debate, I would post the same thing, and I'd get a chuckle out of every time. I said, how do I stay healthy? I said, every day I get up and do devotions and prayer. Every day I work out. Every day I try to eat right. And then I added, I said, every day when I post something on social media, I ignore the comments. And then I add for the primary, and I said I never watched the Democrat presidential primary. So I just take away all the the angst and disgust out there. I joke about, but it's everything I said is just true. I think part of it is, again, why it's often good to have friends who aren't immersed in politics either. Not that you can't have them too, but they give you perspective. One of the most amazing, interesting things, not just for me, but for my wife, Tonette, was last year, after we're being governor, somebody had written something to me about what was coming up or what was said in the state address by now Governor Evers. And I said something to my wife about it. And she goes, "Oh, I didn't even know there was a state of the state address." And it was a great reminder for us that when you're in that office, when you're in the Capitol, everybody thinks the world revolves around that. When you go back to your own homes, most people, other than maybe the State of the Union, most people don't pay attention to any of that stuff. And so it was just a great reminder about not that those things don't matter, they do, but that there's a disconnect with most citizens out there. So one, that was interesting. The other part, though, is, like you said, I just try to stay positive. I think staying grounded. I always said that even at the height of the protest, if I started the day and ended the day the same, and that is on my knees, praying to God for guidance, the rest would work itself out. And you got to shake it off. I used to have here and across the country, I would have people that were trackers that would follow me around if I went to a fundraiser, a campaign event, anything really. And what I did was, some people, if you look, sometimes you'll see ads where trackers followed them and they're flipping them off or acting disgusted or putting their hand up. But what I did was just the opposite. I would ask their names and I would wave at them and say hi to them by name. I'd say, hey, Daniel, hey, Elizabeth, hey, Mark. And one, because it humanized, it made it. I also said there's a practical reason, because it screwed their videos up, because you can't use a video of me going, "Hey, Daniel, how you doing?" That really doesn't work.
That's great. That's great.
But you just realize that people are real, and even those you disagree with, it's real easy to think, "Oh, that son of a you know what." But instead, I always thought, somebody ticked me off. Actually, I'll give you a quick story. So thankfully, in the last year, overwhelmingly when I travel, get 99 of 100 times, most times people come up and say, "Hey, can I have a picture? Will you take a selfie? Will you meet my kid? I'm a big fan. Wish you were there." All that's great. Not just here in Wisconsin, but across the country. But one trip, I was going to Asheville, North Carolina to speak, and I think I had to connect through Atlanta. So I'm on this plane. I'm sitting down next to this guy, and two of the last people on the plane get on, and the woman was the first one, and she sees me, and she just goes off on me. "Oh, Scott Walker, you're scum of the earth. I hate you. I'm glad you're not governor, blah, 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 blah." And I turned, I'm like, "Oh." And then the husband goes, "Oh, you suck. You're awful," the whole bit. And I turned, and everybody around us is like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" And I just turned and I looked at him and I said, "You know what? I'm going to pray for you on this trip." and the funny thing is, the guy, honest to God, he said, "Don't you dare." Don't you dare.
I don't want your prayers.
So I actually did pray for him, because I thought to myself, if this couple, if they're so consumed with hate, if they're so worked up about stuff that they're willing to just totally embarrass themselves on a plane by going off, and somebody's just sitting there, I am going to pray for them, because there's a void in their life that's far greater than just their political differences with me. And so I found, instead of internalizing it, you got to lift it up to God and say, "Hey, these are real people, and there are other things going on, and I can actually feel for them, even if they don't agree with me, or even if they hate me."
You've never been shy about talking about your faith at all. How has that played a role in your career and in your life?
Oh, without a doubt. I got to tell you, at the height of the protest is probably the best example of where, overwhelming. I remember one of the verses I went back to was in 2 Corinthians, in Paul's second letter to the church in Corinth. And he talks about, I love that point, at least in my Bible, where, everything's black and white except for that passage, 2 Corinthians 12:9, where it's in red, because it's, here Paul had the thorn in his flesh, and God said to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." And I kept coming back to that over and over again, because it was a reminder that, hey, no matter what you're going through, and even more true now than just back then, my grace is more than sufficient, because it overcomes all this weakness and anxiety and fear and all the things we're experiencing here and around the world today. And that's why I just keep coming back to God's word, because I find it's not coincidence. It is always providence, that whether it's directly in the word or sometimes. I remember one day when I had all sorts of threats, death threats and otherwise. They were talking about me and my wife and my kids. I was flying around the state trying to talk to people, one of the airports I was at, one of the mechanics came up to me and just handed me a piece of paper. If I remember right, I think it was Isaiah 54:17, and it was, "No sword cast against you shall prevail." And it was just, like I said, it wasn't a coincidence. It was providence. It was God sending angels on earth to remind me that it was going to be okay. One of the other weird things I told Mike Pence and I told Paul Ryan 4 years before him when they were running for vice president, asking for advice, I said, the best advice I give you isn't political. It is when you go to events and people come up to you and say all sorts of things, "Good luck, I support you, we're there for you," may or may not be true. The one thing that people say that's always true, people don't lie about this, is they say, "I'm praying for you." They said, my advice to them is reach out and touch them. Because what I found was during my, the critical time I had during the protest was that people would come up to me in the weirdest times and they would just tell me they're praying for them. And I, since then, even today, when I'm out, well, I don't touch today,
right.
but up until, this month, when people say they're praying for me, I always explain that so they don't think I'm weird touching. It may just be their elbow or shoulder, but I always touch them because I think back in the Bible to the story about the woman who had been unclean for 12 years, who was so desperate to be healed that she heard Jesus was coming. He was going somewhere to heal someone's daughter. And in the midst of this crowd, she reached out and touched just his cloak. And Jesus turned and said, "Who touched me?" Because he could feel her. And he said, you've been healed because of her belief, her faith. And it just reminded me that if Christ can even feel someone reaching out to touch the cloak of his garment, how much more so when we pray for each other can we not only feel that spiritually, we can literally, physically feel that. So that's often encouragement I've given to others, and particularly, I said, two of my friends, Paul Ryan and Mike Pence, when they were running for vice president.
Well, I can reach out virtually and touch you and tell you that I am praying for you. I pray for a lot of people, of course, but you're in a lot of people's prayers, I think. I really believe that, and obviously a lot of people don't like that, or even like, we publish things in DrydenWire that not everybody particularly cares for, but that's, what, it is what it is. Start your own media outlet and do what you want. I don't care. So I've heard one last thing. I was asked to ask you this, if it's true or not. I was told by someone that that pretty much every road and back road in northern Wisconsin because of your Harley. Is that true, or is that just an exaggeration? Is that one of those just urban legends?
No, it's. One of the things I've loved is long before I was governor, I would do. I got the bug back in 2003. I have a 2003 anniversary edition Harley right now with about 24,000 miles on. I'm itching for the weather to be a little bit better. But one of the fun things is, as I traveled the state campaigning and then as governor, is people tell, "Oh, you probably don't know where this is or that is," or I just said somebody the other day, it's not northern, it's central Wisconsin, but say, "Oh, you probably never heard of this place. It's called Dakota." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I know where it is. There's a bar on the north side, and there's a restaurant on the south side, and there's a sign in the middle of the road that says North Dakota, South Dakota." And I said, "I know that because I've been on a Harley right there." And so to me, that, other than my prayer and working out that I talked about, that's one of my best respites, is just to get away on my motorcycle. Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story, though. When I was governor that first year, and the protests were going on, often in the spring and the summer, just to get away, I'd hop on my motorcycle, my Harley, and go riding, and I'd have to ride out of town in Madison to get further out. And I have a full-faced helmet on, thankfully, because I'd pull up and these vehicles would all have recall watches. If you only knew, you could turn and knock me off my bike.
Did you wave at them?
Hey, you have no idea.
You have no idea who I am, do you? That's great. Well, what else? Is there anything else that you wanted to say or to touch base on with anything?
Well, I'll just tell you, folks, again, scottwalker.com, you go there. I don't have anything. I'm not selling anything. But if you go and sign up for our social media, you can go back, and I'll probably post it again. You mentioned being on there. More than anything else, I wrote a prayer a couple weeks ago on the day that President Trump called for a national day of prayer. I actually typed it out. I don't say I wrote it because God inspired it, so I think it came from God. But it was just about how we need God now more than ever. And that if anything, to me at least, I think if anything positive's come out of this, is that it's hopefully awakened not only this nation, but the world, that in a time when, we talked about social media, when everything is so divided, when we're so consumed, when there's so much anger, that more than anything, God, we've been on our phones, we've been on TV, we've been doing all these things for too long. I think more than anything, God's called us to reconnect with our families in ways we have for years, if not generations. God has called us to reconnect with our friends. I hope people have done that as well. I talked to my mom now a couple times today on FaceTime. I reached out to friends I haven't talked to in years over the last month. But most important, I think God's called us to reconnect with him. And I hope if people want, go on there and read that prayer and share it with others, because a lot of people told me it's touched them. And again, it's not me. I feel God said, hey, you need to share this out there, because there's a lot of anxiety. People don't know who to trust, what to believe, what to do next, what's going to come next. And I think more than anything, we just got to say, hey, God, we need you. We can't do this alone. Your grace is more than sufficient for us, even in the midst of our weakness.
Well, I think you might be right, because my mom bought a Bible for me, because I usually will listen to either like a YouTube or a podcast, or I will read the Bible on the computer. But I spend all day on the computer, like all day. That's my job. And it wasn't until Mom got this an actual study Bible. It was just about a month ago that I actually just opened it up one morning because of this staying at home a lot more, and I just happened to be sitting next to me, and I opened it up and went right to the book of Esther. I'm like, I guess I'm starting on Esther. And that was the first time I think I've actually read the Bible. Now, I do it on the computer, but I mean, the first time, and now it was a short, book. So I got through it relatively quickly, but I have found that I have been getting closer to my faith ever more than ever before. And I don't know what that was from. I don't know if it's because of the coronavirus. I have no idea. Obviously, there's a plan for everything. And I certainly wouldn't put my faith on anyone. You do what you want to do. You do you. But it certainly has been on my mind, and it certainly has been impacting us and our family in our faith. So it's been pretty neat.
Well, you do all that, right. And the kicker is doing that. Not only is it a good thing to do, I actually think it transcends everything else you do. It makes you, interact better with not only your family and your friends, your coworkers, people in your community. I just think to me, you asked that question before about humanizing things. I just think the more we listen to God's word, the more we pray about that, take that in, the easier it is to get through life, even when people are being ridiculous.
Yeah.
You just got to smile and realize, okay, I can handle this. I can take this.
Exactly. And if the worst thing you can say about me is that I'm trying to get close to God, I mean, okay, I can take that, I guess. I have no problem with that.
Exactly.
Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. It was absolutely a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone for watching. We'll see you right back here Monday morning at 8:30 when business owner and 10th Senate District candidate Sherry Link will join me for a chat. So until then, stay safe, keep your social distance, and have a blessed day.